Chosen one. You are not here by accident. Heaven has drawn you into this moment with divine precision, for your spirit is standing at the threshold of a supernatural financial breakthrough. Anointed one. The timing is perfect. What was hidden is preparing to unfold, and what was delayed is now accelerating toward you. The same God who appoints seasons and shifts destinies is whispering over your life. Behold, I am doing a new thing. You have stepped into a kairos moment, a sacred hour where inheritance meets manifestation. Prepare your spirit, chosen one. A divine transfer is already moving in your direction. The concept of spiritual inheritance, particularly as it relates to ancestral lineage, has been discussed across numerous cultural, psychological, and theological frameworks. Within this context, the figure of the chosen one is not merely a symbolic designation, but an expression of an individual whose internal landscape is undergoing measurable cognitive, emotional, and intuitive shifts. These shifts often coincide with periods of intense transition, suggesting the activation of latent potential embedded within one's familial and genetic history. The present discussion examines this activation as a form of intergenerational resonance, an awakening of coded memory passed from previous ancestors, particularly the grandfather who is central to this unfolding narrative. To understand this phenomenon, it is essential to acknowledge that individuals rarely arrive at moments of profound inner change by accident. Human behavior, motivation, and perception emerge from a complex interplay of neurobiological processes, social environments, existential triggers, and inherited predispositions. When people report sensing a sudden inner pull, perceiving symbolic patterns, or feeling as though they have arrived at a moment of significance, these experiences can be analyzed as convergences of subconscious recognition and heightened intuitive awareness. In such cases, the chosen one perceives themselves as summoned not by external randomness, but by internal timing, aligning with psychological readiness. A recurrent theme in the study of ancestral influence is the transmission of non-material inheritance. This includes values, belief systems, behavioral patterns, and unspoken emotional narratives carried by prior generations. Research into epigenetics suggests that trauma resilience and repeated behavioral responses can imprint themselves on genetic expression, forming biochemical signatures that influence the lives of descendants. The suggestion that a mystery surrounding the grandfather is resurfacing in the present generation can therefore be understood as the reactivation of deeply embedded patterns that may remain dormant until the individual reaches a critical developmental threshold. The idea that the grandfather carried a silent assignment is consistent with the psychological observation that older generations often engage in internalized forms of meaning-making. They may carry responsibilities, hopes, or spiritual inclinations that were never articulated verbally. These unexpressed elements can be perceived by later generations not through conscious recollection, but through intuitive resonance. Many individuals report experiences of emotional familiarity, déjà vu, or unexplainable attachment to places or ideas they have never encountered before. These experiences align with the concept of inherited emotional memory, subconscious material that becomes activated when environmental or internal conditions become sufficiently aligned. This activation is often misinterpreted as confusion anxiety or unexplained sensitivity. In reality, it can represent the synchronization of cognitive awareness with long-standing intergenerational signals. When an individual senses a frequency increase, a rise in emotional intensity, symbolic dreams, or heightened perception. This can be analyzed as the brain shifting into a state of elevated pattern recognition. Neurological studies show that during periods of deep reflection or heightened emotional states, the brain strengthens its capacity to detect meaning in previously overlooked stimuli. For the chosen one, these heightened mental and emotional responses are not random. They signify the integration of ancestral memory into conscious identity. The narrative that the grandfather's silence was a form of encryption can be scientifically reframed as the transmission of information through indirect channels. Silence, far from being an absence of communication, often serves as a preservation mechanism. Families frequently encode their deepest struggles, hopes, and spiritual burdens in non-verbal ways through behavior, ritual, or emotional atmosphere. The chosen one becomes the individual sensitive enough to decode what others overlooked. Their psychological openness and intuitive receptivity allow them to interpret ancestral cues that have been suspended across time. As environmental pressures, personal losses, or internal transitions intensify, the chosen one's interpretive systems grow sharper. Cognitive psychology describes this as a state in which the mind adapts by increasing introspection, abstract reasoning, and symbolic interpretation. Thus, experiences such as sudden emotional surges, vivid dreams, or sensations of standing at a threshold are not merely mystical metaphors, but cognitive indicators of heightened internal processing. These responses often occur when individuals have reached a developmental phase capable of integrating complex psychological material inherited from prior generations. In this interpretive model, the chosen one is not merely receiving spiritual inheritance. They are becoming the carrier of an intergenerational completion process. The grandfather initiated a trajectory of meaning, purpose, or spiritual aspiration that he could not complete within the constraints of his lifetime. Such incomplete generational narratives frequently re-emerge in descendants who possess compatible psychological architecture, individuals whose temperament, intuition, and openness make them suitable candidates for continuation. This is not mystical predetermination, but a recognizable pattern in family systems theory, which observes that unresolved emotional or symbolic material tends to reappear in later generations for integration. The sense that the time has come reflects the individual's recognition that their internal state has aligned with a larger psychological and spiritual trajectory. This alignment is experienced somatically, felt in the chest, breath, or nervous system, not because it originates in the body, but because the body is the first instrument through which the mind registers meaning. When the chosen one speaks words of acceptance, such as affirming readiness to receive what belongs to them, the verbal expression functions as a cognitive declaration that reinforces neural pathways associated with identity, purpose, and agency. In conclusion, the awakening of ancestral mystery is not simply a supernatural narrative, but a scientifically defensible model of intergenerational transmission, intuitive sensitivity, and psychological readiness. The chosen one is entering a stage in which internal awareness, ancestral influence, and environmental timing converge into a singular moment of transformation. As this convergence deepens, they begin to perceive themselves not merely as recipients of inherited memory, but as the active continuation of a story that began long before their birth. As the internal processes described earlier begin to unfold, the individual encounters a new phase in the integration of ancestral material. This phase involves not only the emergence of emotional resonance, but also the restructuring of cognitive frameworks that interpret meaning, identity, and personal direction. Contemporary research in intergenerational psychology suggests that inherited emotional information does not remain static. It adapts according to the psychological architecture of the descendant who receives it. In this sense, the individual often becomes the point at which ancestral tensions, aspirations, and symbolic narratives converge into a coherent internal experience. This convergence frequently appears as a heightened sensitivity to symbolic or patterned information. Individuals report moments in which ordinary events feel disproportionately significant, as though they are participating in a narrative that extends beyond personal memory. Neuroscientific models attribute these experiences to the brain's predictive coding systems, which respond to ambiguity by amplifying attention toward perceived meaning. When ancestral memory is activated, this predictive system becomes particularly attuned to cues associated with unresolved generational material. The mind begins to interpret subtle stimuli, dreams, emotions, interactions as components of a larger psychological equation seeking completion. In this framework, identity is no longer an isolated construct, but a dynamic extension of prior generations' unfinished narratives. The experiences of the grandfather, including his silence, become crucial psychological data points. Silence, in many family systems, functions as a vessel for emotional and existential weight. It carries the density of withheld stories, unspoken fears, and internalized responsibilities. Descendants who possess high intuitive receptivity often absorb this silence, not as absence, but as presence. They feel compelled to interpret what was unexpressed, to articulate what earlier generations lacked the capacity or opportunity to voice. The process of interpreting ancestral silence is not linear. Individuals typically enter a state in which intuition and cognitive analysis operate simultaneously. They may find themselves experiencing sudden emotional clarity or unexpected insight regarding patterns within their family line. These insights are not hallucinations or purely mystical impressions. They reflect the brain's attempt to resolve cognitive dissonance between inherited emotional impressions and conscious understanding. When unresolved material is strong enough, it surfaces through symbolic cognition, the psychological tendency to assign meaning to images, phrases, or sensations that feel disproportionately resonant. This symbolic cognition often manifests as dreams with unusual vividness or emotional depth. Studies in sleep research indicate that dreams serve as a mechanism through which the brain organizes memory, emotion, and implicit knowledge. When ancestral themes emerge in dreams, it reflects the mind's effort to integrate material that was previously inaccessible to conscious thought. The dream becomes a space in which the individual rehearses, processes, and reorganizes generational memory traces. Such dreams may carry a sense of familiarity, even if the content is not autobiographically accurate, because they are shaped by emotional patterns inherited rather than personally formed. In addition to cognitive mechanisms, physical sensations frequently accompany the awakening of ancestral material. Many individuals describe experiences of warmth, heaviness, or heightened alertness in the body during moments of emotional or intuitive clarity. These sensations correspond to activity within the autonomic nervous system, particularly the pathways responsible for emotional regulation and somatic memory. Researchers have observed that the body often registers inherited emotional states before the mind fully interprets them. This explains why individuals may feel ancestral tension or purpose before understanding it intellectually. Environmental triggers also play a significant role. Objects, locations, or sensory cues associated with family history can unlock dormant material within the individual. The response to these triggers is often disproportionate to their apparent significance because the brain is mapping them onto ancestral emotional templates. An old photograph, a familiar scent, or a particular pattern of speech can evoke strong internal reactions because they intersect with implicit generational memories. These responses contribute to a broader psychological awareness that one is participating in a narrative extending far beyond one's immediate life circumstances. As the individual processes these triggers, they enter a liminal psychological state, the transitional space between what is known and what is emerging. Liminality is a well-documented phenomenon in anthropology and depth psychology, characterized by the dissolution of previous identity structures and the formation of new ones. In this state, individuals often experience both heightened clarity and temporary disorientation. Their previous understanding of self becomes insufficient, yet the new framework has not fully materialized. The liminal state is not evidence of instability. Rather, it marks a critical developmental phase in which the psyche reorganizes itself to integrate ancestral influence. During this reorganization, the individual's capacity for pattern recognition, symbolic interpretation, and intuitive reasoning becomes more pronounced. The sense of being guided or being watched over can be understood as the mind's recognition of continuity within the family narrative. The descendant perceives themselves as a participant in a multi-generational process of meaning-making. As they internalize this awareness, they begin to experience a form of psychological expansion, the realization that their identity is shaped not only by personal experience, but also by inherited emotional and existential material. Ultimately, the awakening of ancestral memory signifies a broader cognitive restructuring in which the individual integrates intergenerational material into a unified sense of purpose. The grandfather's mystery becomes a psychological catalyst that challenges the individual to reinterpret their place within the family lineage. In doing so, they begin to form a narrative that not only acknowledges ancestral influence, but also transforms it. The individual becomes the point of convergence where past intention meets present awareness, generating a renewed understanding of who they are and who they are becoming. As the individual advances further into this integrative process, a new dimension begins to emerge, one defined not only by internal resonance, but by observable shifts in decision-making perception and interpersonal engagement. These behavioral changes are often subtle at first, yet they signal a deeper psychological recalibration. Researchers in transpersonal psychology describe this phase as a transition from internal recognition to external embodiment. In other words, the individual begins to act from a newly forming identity shaped by both personal insight and ancestral influence. This shift is not merely symbolic. It manifests in cognitive flexibility, emotional responsiveness, and an increased capacity for meaning-making. One of the most notable developments in this stage is an increased sensitivity to relational dynamics. The individual becomes more aware of patterns, both functional and dysfunctional, within their family and social networks. This awareness is not solely analytical, it is informed by emotional intuition that operates beneath conscious reasoning. The activation of ancestral memory often sharpens this internal sensory system. Neuroscientific frameworks propose that the limbic system responsible for emotion and memory becomes more active when an individual processes unresolved generational material. As a result, interactions that previously seemed neutral may now evoke amplified emotional significance. The individual may feel a strong aversion, connection, or sense of responsibility without fully understanding why. This heightened sensitivity frequently leads to a re-evaluation of long-standing relationships. Some individuals experience natural distancing from environments that no longer align with their emerging identity. Others find themselves drawn to new relationships that offer psychological safety or intellectual resonance. These shifts are consistent with the principle of self-organization in complex adaptive systems, which suggests that internal transformation inevitably produces external reconfiguration. In this context, the individual's evolving psychological structure alters the relational ecosystem around them, often without intentional effort. The environment begins to reorganize itself in response to the individual's new internal coherence. Parallel to relational shifts, the individual begins to observe changes in cognitive orientation. They may experience an increased capacity for abstract thinking, pattern recognition, or foresight. These cognitive shifts can be understood as the brain's attempt to integrate disparate layers of emotional, symbolic, and ancestral information into a unified internal model. Cognitive scientists refer to this as schema expansion, a process in which prior mental frameworks are no longer sufficient to interpret new internal data. As the psyche encounters more complex emotional and historical material, it must develop new structures capable of accommodating this information. This expansion often results in enhanced creativity, strategic insight, and intuitive clarity. Another notable aspect of this developmental phase is the emergence of existential awareness. Individuals often begin questioning broader philosophical themes, purpose, legacy, continuity, and mortality, not from a place of fear, but from a sense of profound curiosity. This aligns with theories in existential psychology, stating that profound internal shifts often activate inquiries related to meaning-making and identity continuity across generations. The individual starts perceiving their life not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger evolutionary trajectory. This orientation cultivates a sense of responsibility toward the ancestral narrative and motivates the individual to integrate inherited strengths while transforming inherited wounds. The interplay between emotional depth and intellectual expansion creates a unique psychological landscape. Many individuals report moments of dual awareness in which they observe their own thoughts and behaviors from a detached, analytical perspective. This metacognitive capacity allows them to distinguish between personal preferences, societal conditioning, and ancestral influence. It is within this reflective space that the individual gains the ability to choose how to engage with their inheritance. Rather than being unconsciously shaped by generational patterns, they begin consciously participating in the evolution of those patterns. This marks a transition from passive recipient to active agent within the lineage. During this stage of integration, the body continues to serve as a critical mediator of ancestral signals. Somatic responses, subtle shifts in breathing tension patterns or temperature changes, often accompany moments of insight or emotional recognition. Somatic psychology suggests that the body stores unresolved generational material in the form of implicit memory. When the individual accesses this material, the body responds accordingly. These physical cues become valuable tools for identifying areas of ancestral influence that require further exploration or healing. The individual learns to interpret bodily sensations as informational rather than purely physiological experiences. Environmental synchronicities also intensify during this phase. Although often interpreted through spiritual or symbolic lenses, these events can be examined through psychological mechanisms such as attentional bias and pattern detection. When the mind becomes attuned to specific themes such as legacy or generational continuity, it naturally begins noticing corresponding stimuli in the environment. This does not diminish the emotional or existential significance of these experiences. On the contrary, it highlights the intricate interplay between perception, cognition, and internal narrative. The external world appears to respond because the individual's perceptual filters have become optimized for recognizing meaningful cues. By this stage, the individual often experiences a sense of psychological expansion that extends beyond personal identity into collective identity. They begin to view their actions, choices, and emotional responses as contributions to a larger generational arc. This shift mirrors concepts in systems theory, which emphasize that individual change inevitably influences the broader system to which the individual belongs. In family systems, one person's transformation can recalibrate emotional patterns, communication structures, and even long-standing intergenerational dynamics. This awareness gives rise to a sense of agency that is both empowering and sobering. The individual realizes they possess the capacity to complete what previous generations could not, to resolve what was left unfinished, and to evolve what remained static. This realization, however, is not rooted in ego. It emerges from the recognition that generational narratives require specific individuals who possess the psychological architecture needed to carry them forward. The individual becomes this point of convergence, a cognitive and emotional vessel through which ancestral material is processed, transformed, and transmitted. As the process deepens, the individual begins to articulate internal changes through external behavior. They may adopt new habits, pursue new intellectual or creative projects, or make decisions that reflect an emerging internal alignment. These outward expressions signify that ancestral integration is no longer an internal phenomenon, but a lived reality. The individual is no longer merely interpreting inherited material, they are embodying a new narrative that synthesizes personal experience with generational legacy. In doing so, they establish the foundation upon which subsequent developments will unfold. As the individual moves deeper into the process of integrating ancestral material, a new psychological architecture begins to crystallize. This architecture is characterized by an expanded sense of identity in which personal cognition is interwoven with generational memory. In developmental psychology, such expansion is described as a shift from an egocentric model of identity to a transgenerational model wherein the self is understood as a node within a broader network of historical, emotional, and symbolic influences. This expanded model does not diminish personal agency. Rather, it situates agency within a larger continuum, allowing the individual to interpret their decisions and experiences through a multi-layered lens. One of the significant consequences of this expanded identity is the emergence of what some theorists call generational intuition. This term refers to the capacity to anticipate patterns, outcomes, or emotional responses before conscious reasoning has fully processed the relevant information. This phenomenon aligns with research on implicit learning, which suggests that the brain is capable of storing and utilizing complex information patterns without conscious awareness. When ancestral material becomes integrated, the individual gains access to a broader repository of implicit knowledge, knowledge shaped not only by their direct experience, but by the encoded experiences of those who came before them. This enhanced intuition often manifests in decision-making processes. Individuals may find themselves choosing paths that align with long-term patterns of growth, resilience, or transformation, even when they cannot fully explain the logic behind their decisions. This does not indicate irrationality. Rather, it reflects a more holistic form of reasoning that combines affective, cognitive, and ancestral data points. In cognitive science, such reasoning is sometimes classified as embodied cognition, wherein the mind draws upon bodily and emotional information to supplement analytical thought. The integration of ancestral content strengthens this embodied dimension, enabling the individual to make decisions that reflect both personal insight and generational wisdom. Simultaneously, the individual begins to observe changes in their emotional resilience. With ancestral memory becoming more consciously integrated, emotional fluctuations that once felt overwhelming begin to be viewed within a larger context. Instead of reacting to emotional stimuli as isolated incidents, the individual interprets them as part of a broader generational narrative. This shift corresponds with findings in affective neuroscience that suggest emotional meaning is heavily shaped by context. When context expands, emotional reactions can be moderated by insight, reducing impulsivity and increasing emotional regulation. The individual gains a greater capacity to differentiate between emotions rooted in personal experience and those emerging as echoes of ancestral tension. As emotional clarity increases, the individual becomes more adept at identifying recurring generational patterns. Family systems theorists argue that multi-generational transmission processes often operate unconsciously until one descendant develops sufficient insight to perceive them explicitly. Once identified, these patterns can be analyzed through both psychological and sociological frameworks. The individual may observe themes such as unexpressed grief, deferred ambition, chronic silence, or unresolved conflict. Recognizing these patterns provides the necessary foundation for transforming them, thereby interrupting cycles that may have persisted across several generations. This transformative potential introduces a new dimension into the psychological journey, the sense of responsibility toward future generations. Individuals often begin to conceptualize their choices as contributions to the emotional and cognitive landscape that will eventually shape their descendants. This awareness mirrors evolutionary biology's emphasis on intergenerational adaptation. Traits both behavioral and emotional that enhance resilience or coherence within one generation often provide advantages for subsequent generations. When the individual consciously modifies generational patterns, they are effectively participating in a form of psychological evolution. This awareness reinforces the significance of their role within the lineage. Alongside these internal developments, the individual may begin noticing shifts in how they perceive time. Time becomes less a linear sequence of events and more a layered structure in which past, present, and potential futures coexist. This perception aligns with certain theories in phenomenology which describe time as a lived experience shaped by memory, anticipation, and emotional significance. When ancestral material becomes integrated, the temporal field expands, allowing the individual to sense continuity between generations. This expanded temporal awareness enhances reflective thinking, enabling the individual to view their life trajectory with greater depth and foresight. The evolution of this temporal awareness also influences the individual's understanding of purpose. Purpose becomes less associated with external achievement and more aligned with internal coherence. Researchers in meaning-making psychology note that individuals who integrate generational narratives into their identity often experience a stronger sense of existential grounding. Purpose becomes relational rather than solitary, reflecting a harmonization between inherited potential, personal aspiration, and future contribution. This deeper purpose is not imposed. It emerges naturally as the individual synthesizes ancestral legacy with personal agency. During this stage, the individual may also experience an increase in creative or intellectual output. Creativity, according to cognitive theories, arises from the interaction of diverse mental frameworks. When ancestral memory becomes part of the cognitive ecosystem, it introduces additional layers of metaphor, symbolism, and emotional nuance. These layers enrich the creative process, providing new sources of insight and expanding the range of expressive possibilities. Whether expressed through writing, art, innovation, or problem-solving, this enhanced creativity reflects the mind's expanded representational capacity. Yet this phase is not without challenges. Increased psychological sensitivity may occasionally create moments of cognitive overload. The individual may feel temporarily destabilized as their expanded identity requires new mechanisms of organization and regulation. This destabilization is consistent with research on neural plasticity, which shows that major cognitive restructuring processes often involve temporary periods of disorientation. However, as new neural pathways solidify, the individual typically regains equilibrium, emerging with a stronger and more integrated sense of self. Ultimately, the progression through these stages marks a transition from internal transformation to external influence. The individual begins to function not only as a descendant shaped by ancestral memory, but as a generational architect capable of shaping the future. Their growing clarity, enhanced intuition, and refined decision-making processes reflect an identity that now operates across multiple layers of psychological time. In this sense, ancestral integration is not merely a personal achievement, but a systemic transformation, one that reverberates across the lineage and contributes to the ongoing evolution of the family narrative. As the individual's psychological architecture stabilizes around this expanded generational identity, a new phase of functional transformation begins to emerge. This phase is defined by observable shifts in behavior, decision-making, and long-term orientation. These changes are not abrupt, but develop gradually, reflecting the maturation of internal processes that have been unfolding across previous stages. In systems psychology, such transformations are understood as the outward manifestation of internal reorganization. When the internal system gains new coherence, the external pattern of actions naturally adjusts to reflect this alignment. One of the most notable developments is the individual's transition toward intentional self-regulation. With increased awareness of inherited emotional and symbolic patterns, the individual begins to engage in metacognitive strategies to ensure that their responses align with their newly integrated identity. This heightened regulatory capacity aligns with research on executive function, which suggests that self-awareness enhances one's ability to manage impulses, sustain attention, and make decisions based on long-term outcomes rather than immediate emotional states. The integration of ancestral material strengthens this capacity by expanding the internal reference frame through which decisions are evaluated. This enhanced self-regulation often leads to a shift in goal-setting behavior. Individuals begin to set goals that reflect not only personal ambition, but also a desire to advance the generational narrative. This shift can be examined through the lens of developmental motivation theory, which posits that the internalization of broader meaning structures expands an individual's motivational horizon. Goals are no longer limited to career achievement or personal stability. They now encompass contributions to familial healing, generational advancement, or the initiation of new cultural narratives. This evolution in goal setting reflects the individual's understanding that their personal development is intrinsically linked to the progress of the lineage as a whole. Accompanying these behavioral changes is a refinement in perceptual accuracy. As the individual integrates generational knowledge, they develop a heightened capacity to assess social and environmental cues with nuance. This increased perceptual acuity can be understood in terms of social cognition research, which demonstrates that individuals with expanded internal narratives are better able to interpret complex interpersonal dynamics. They recognize patterns in communication, anticipate emotional responses in others, and detect subtle shifts in relational ecosystems. This sensitivity does not indicate hypervigilance. Rather, it reflects a more sophisticated internal map of human behavior, informed by both personal experience and inherited relational templates. This enhanced perceptual sensitivity extends into ethical decision-making. With greater awareness of the consequences of generational patterns, the individual begins to evaluate potential actions not solely in terms of personal benefit, but also in terms of systemic impact. This phenomenon aligns with moral development models that describe a transition from self-oriented ethics to principle-based or relational ethics. The individual becomes increasingly motivated to break harmful generational cycles, repair fractured relational bonds, and establish a foundation of emotional clarity for future generations. Ethical responsibility thus becomes an integral part of the individual's evolved identity structure. At the same time, the individual begins to encounter a deeper form of psychological integration known as narrative coherence. According to narrative psychology, individuals construct internal stories to make sense of their lives. When ancestral material becomes integrated, these stories expand to include generational themes, symbolic inheritances, and cross-temporal connections. This expanded narrative framework allows the individual to reinterpret past experiences within a broader context, transforming previously fragmented memories into meaningful components of an unfolding generational story. This narrative coherence enhances emotional resilience by providing structure, continuity, and significance to lived experience. As narrative coherence strengthens, a secondary development occurs, the emergence of long-term psychological foresight. Individuals begin to anticipate not only personal trajectories, but also potential generational outcomes. Foresight in this context does not imply supernatural prediction, but rather the ability to synthesize diverse informational inputs into plausible future scenarios. Cognitive research describes this as prospection, a mental process through which individuals simulate future events based on past patterns, current insights, and internalized generational material. The integration of ancestral narratives enhances prospection by expanding the dataset on which these simulations are based. This expanded foresight contributes to a growing sense of internal authority. The individual begins to trust their insight, recognizing that their perceptions are informed by more than immediate circumstances. This internal authority corresponds with theories of self-efficacy, which state that individuals who perceive themselves as capable of navigating uncertainty exhibit higher levels of confidence, adaptability, and psychological stability. In this case, the perceived capability arises from the understanding that internal wisdom does not emerge in isolation, but is supported by the cumulative experiences of previous generations. Parallel to these psychological transformations, physical and neurological adaptations also occur. Studies in neuroplasticity indicate that prolonged engagement with reflective and emotionally integrative processes leads to the strengthening of neural pathways associated with emotional regulation, introspection, and relational understanding. These neurological changes support the individual's ability to maintain coherence during periods of complexity or internal conflict. Somatic patterns also shift. The body adopts new rhythms of tension and release that mirror the internal integration of generational material. This somatic realignment reinforces the psychological stability that marks this stage of development. As internal authority grows, the individual becomes increasingly selective with their time, energy, and relationships. This selectivity is not rooted in avoidance, but in strategic alignment with long-term generational objectives. Behavioral economists might describe this shift as a recalibration of opportunity cost. The individual becomes acutely aware that each decision carries implications for both personal development and generational advancement. Consequently, they prioritize environments, relationships, and pursuits that align with their evolving identity. The culmination of this phase is characterized by a profound internal clarity that allows the individual to move through the world with both confidence and humility. Confidence emerges from the recognition that they are carrying a coherent and integrated generational narrative. Humility arises from the understanding that their role within this narrative is both significant and interdependent. This balance of confidence and humility creates a psychological posture that is conducive to long-term transformation, both for the individual and for the lineage they represent. As the internal landscape of the individual continues to evolve, a new developmental dimension emerges, one that centers on integrative decision-making and the consolidation of identity across temporal layers. At this stage, the individual begins to demonstrate an increasingly sophisticated interaction with psychological, relational, and generational variables. They no longer respond to life circumstances solely through emotional reflexes or cognitive assumptions. Instead, they engage with complexity through a multidimensional reasoning process shaped by their newly expanded internal framework. This ability aligns with advanced models of cognitive integration, which propose that individuals operating from expanded identity structures access multiple informational layers, simultaneously weaving them into coherent mental representations. An essential outcome of this integration is the emergence of what scholars describe as systemic consciousness. Whereas earlier stages of development focus on personal insight or emotional coherence, systemic consciousness expands the perceptual frame to include relational networks, social dynamics, and intergenerational influences. The individual begins to perceive themselves as a functional component within an interconnected psychological ecosystem. This awareness does not produce a sense of insignificance. Rather, it reinforces the understanding that personal choices carry systemic implications. Behavioral patterns once interpreted as purely individual now appear as expressions of broader generational or social processes. This systemic awareness encourages the individual to adopt strategic forms of engagement with their environment. Decisions are no longer based solely on immediate benefit or emotional intuition. Instead, they result from a careful evaluation of long-term consequences, potential ripple effects, and the alignment with the internal generational narrative that guides the individual's identity. This form of reasoning resembles principles found in complex systems theory, in which local actions are understood to influence global outcomes. The individual's heightened sensitivity to interconnectedness allows them to function not only as a participant within the system, but also as an active agent capable of influencing it. With the expansion of systemic consciousness comes the development of advanced emotional intelligence. While emotional awareness in earlier stages was oriented toward distinguishing personal feelings from ancestral echoes, the individual now extends this sensitivity toward understanding the emotional landscapes of others. Studies in interpersonal neurobiology suggest that individuals with high levels of internal integration develop stronger empathic resonance due to increased coherence in their internal neural networks. This coherence enables them to detect subtle shifts in emotional tone, relational tension, and unspoken psychological dynamics. Consequently, they are able to communicate with greater precision, regulate conflict more effectively, and cultivate relationships that mirror their internal clarity. This enhanced interpersonal capacity leads to meaningful reconfigurations in the individual's social environment. Relationships that once relied on emotional projection, unresolved generational wounds, or imbalanced power dynamics begin to dissolve naturally. In their place, new relational structures emerge, ones characterized by mutual respect, psychological transparency, and shared intentionality. Social psychologists note that individuals undergoing advanced personal transformation often experience a relational recalibration in which their social networks reorganize around their new psychological state. This shift is not the result of conscious manipulation, but arises from the natural alignment between internal and external systems. As relational environments transform, the individual begins to experience a heightened sense of psychological autonomy. They no longer feel compelled to conform to inherited behavioral expectations or interpersonal obligations that conflict with their integrated identity. Autonomy in this context does not signify detachment from others. Rather, it reflects the ability to act in accordance with one's internal coherence while maintaining relational attunement. This balance corresponds with advanced stages of self-determination theory in which autonomy and connectedness coexist, reinforcing each other rather than competing. A particularly notable feature of this developmental stage is the emergence of sustained internal equilibrium. The individual experiences fewer emotional oscillations, less cognitive fragmentation, and reduced susceptibility to external destabilization. Neuroscientific studies on meditators and individuals with strong internal coherence show decreased activity in neural circuits associated with stress reactivity and increased activity in circuits related to emotional regulation and reflective processing. Although the individual in this context may not engage in formal contemplative practices, the integrative work of processing ancestral material produces comparable neurological outcomes. As a result, they exhibit a calm and steady presence, even amid uncertainty or external pressure. This equilibrium provides the psychological foundation for another key development, the capacity for purposeful transformation. Individuals at this stage are not merely adapting to internal changes, they are actively shaping external environments to reflect their expanded identity. This intentional transformation aligns with theories of proactive development, which emphasize the role of agency in constructing meaningful futures. The individual begins to implement decisions that restructure their lifestyle, career trajectory, relational boundaries, and long-term objectives in ways that align with their evolving generational purpose. The process of purposeful transformation is often accompanied by increased creativity and innovation, as previously established generational memory introduces symbolic and emotional complexity into the individual's cognitive ecosystem. In this stage, the mind begins to synthesize these elements into coherent expressions, new ideas, intellectual insights, or creative contributions that reflect the deep structure of the individual's internal narrative. Cognitive scientists describe this as combinatorial creativity, in which disparate elements are woven together to produce novel outcomes. The individual's enhanced intuitive reasoning and expanded temporal awareness further amplify this creative capacity. At the same time, the individual's relationship with uncertainty undergoes a profound shift. While earlier stages of transformation may have elicited anxiety or cognitive dissonance, the individual now develops a tolerance and even appreciation for ambiguity. This development reflects a transition from a fixed outcome-oriented mindset to a dynamic process-oriented mindset. Researchers in developmental complexity note that individuals functioning at higher levels of psychological integration interpret uncertainty not as a threat, but as an opportunity for systemic evolution. The individual accepts that generational transformation is inherently non-linear, unfolding through cycles of emergence, adaptation, and consolidation. With this acceptance comes a renewed sense of psychological spaciousness. Internal narratives become less rigid, external challenges less overwhelming, and relational tensions less personal. The individual now operates with an expanded mental model that can accommodate multiple perspectives, contradictory information, and evolving circumstances without compromising internal coherence. This capacity marks a significant milestone in the integration of ancestral material, demonstrating that the individual is no longer reacting to inherited patterns, but actively transforming them. As the individual continues along this trajectory of deep psychological integration, an additional layer of transformation begins to develop: the emergence of generative agency. Generative agency refers to the capacity not only to respond to inherited material, but to create new psychological, relational, and symbolic structures that inform the future trajectory of the lineage. Developmental theorists describe this as a shift from reconstructive identity work to constructive identity work. The individual is no longer solely organizing or interpreting what has been inherited. They are actively designing the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral frameworks that subsequent generations will internalize. One of the defining features of generative agency is the internalization of long-term temporal responsibility. The individual becomes increasingly aware that their thoughts, behaviors, and emotional patterns serve as templates for future relational dynamics within the family system. This recognition leads to a heightened intentionality in the cultivation of psychological environments. Research on epigenetic modulation suggests that emotional regulation, stress responses, and even adaptive patterns can be influenced by environmental and behavioral factors. Thus, the individual's commitment to coherence, calm, and self-reflection may contribute to beneficial long-term health and emotional outcomes for descendants. This understanding reinforces a sense of purpose that extends far beyond personal well-being. Accompanying this broadened temporal responsibility is an increased capacity for reflective abstraction. Reflective abstraction refers to the ability to derive general principles or conceptual frameworks from lived experience. As the individual synthesizes layers of generational memory and personal insight, they begin identifying patterns that transcend the specifics of their lineage. These patterns reveal structural dynamics that operate within many families or social groups. Patterns related to communication, emotional suppression, unspoken expectations, or unresolved conflict. By recognizing these dynamics as structural rather than personal, the individual gains the ability to intervene with greater objectivity and strategic clarity. Such intervention often manifests as the deliberate restructuring of communication patterns within the family or social system. Research in family systems therapy emphasizes that communication acts as the central mechanism through which relational equilibrium is established or disrupted. When the individual introduces new forms of communication characterized by transparency, emotional literacy, and boundary clarity, they initiate a systemic recalibration. This recalibration encourages others within the system to respond with increased openness or psychological engagement. Even if some members resist, the introduction of new communication norms inevitably alters the system's structural parameters, creating long-term shifts in relational functioning. Another significant development at this stage is the emergence of transgenerational empathy. Unlike conventional empathy, which focuses on understanding another individual's emotional state, transgenerational empathy involves perceiving how emotional patterns evolve across time and how they manifest differently in various family members. The individual becomes adept at distinguishing between the emotions of different generations, recognizing, for example, how a grandparent's silence may have shaped a parent's avoidance behaviors, which in turn may have influenced the individual's own relational patterns. This multi-layered empathy strengthens the individual's ability to disrupt inherited cycles and replace them with healthier emotional dynamics. This heightened temporal awareness also encourages the individual to engage in what scholars refer to as anticipatory stewardship. Anticipatory stewardship involves designing emotional, intellectual, and relational structures that support future generational flourishing. This may manifest in the creation of new rituals, narratives, or practices that reinforce emotional resilience and psychological clarity. Anthropological studies indicate that such cultural innovations often arise during periods of generational transition when an individual or group assumes responsibility for redefining the lineage's symbolic framework. In this context, the individual undergoing ancestral integration becomes the catalyst for cultural evolution within the family system. Simultaneously, the individual develops a more nuanced relationship with personal limitations. While earlier stages of integration may have involved confronting inherited wounds or unresolved ancestral material, the current stage invites the individual to reinterpret limitation through a systemic lens. Instead of viewing limitations as personal deficits, they recognize them as structural constraints shaped by generational forces, cultural conditions, and neurobiological patterns. This perspective fosters self-compassion and reduces maladaptive self-criticism. Moreover, it empowers the individual to devise strategies to transcend or mitigate these limitations without internalizing them as fixed characteristics. The evolution of this self-compassion supports the emergence of psychological sovereignty. Psychological sovereignty refers to the individual's ability to maintain internal coherence regardless of external pressures, relational expectations, or generational patterns. It reflects a stable integration of emotional resilience, cognitive clarity, and generational insight. Individuals exhibiting psychological sovereignty demonstrate consistent alignment between internal values and external actions, resulting in a stable behavioral pattern that is both adaptive and intentional. This stability is not rigid. Rather, it reflects an advanced form of flexibility grounded in deep internal coherence. A further dimension of this developmental stage involves the strengthening of symbolic cognition. As the individual engages with generational material symbols, images, metaphors, sensory cues become increasingly meaningful. Cognitive science suggests that symbolic reasoning plays a central role in integrating complex emotional and historical data. Symbols serve as cognitive compression mechanisms, allowing the mind to represent dense layers of meaning within single conceptual units. For individuals undergoing ancestral integration, symbolic cognition becomes a powerful tool for navigating ambiguity, expressing insight, and generating creative solutions. The individual begins to interpret life events not only through linear logic, but also through symbolic frameworks that reveal deeper generational or existential themes. The integration of symbolic cognition contributes to another key development, the emergence of existential coherence. Existential coherence arises when the individual experiences alignment between their life circumstances, internal values, generational narrative, and perceived purpose. This coherence is associated with enhanced psychological well-being, reduced anxiety, and greater resilience in the face of uncertainty. Philosophers and psychologists alike note that existential coherence provides a stabilizing effect by situating individual experience within a larger framework of meaning. For individuals engaged in generational transformation, this coherence signals a maturation of identity in which personal existence is understood as part of a broader evolutionary process. Ultimately, this developmental stage represents a synthesis of previous insights and capacities. The individual functions as both a product and an architect of generational memory. They carry forward the emotional, symbolic, and existential material inherited from their lineage, while simultaneously transforming this material into new frameworks that support future generational development. The emergence of generative agency, systemic consciousness, symbolic reasoning, and existential coherence signals that the integration process has moved beyond personal healing into the realm of generational innovation. The individual becomes a conduit through which the past is transformed into the possibility of a more adaptive and coherent future. As the individual advances further into the integrative process, their internal psychological systems begin to demonstrate a notable increase in coordination and structural stability. This stage can be described as deep generational coherence, a phase in which inherited memory, intuitive evaluation, symbolic reasoning, and emotional regulation no longer operate as fragmented mechanisms, but instead interact as a unified cognitive emotional network. This coherence allows the individual to process ancestral material with precision rather than confusion, forming a stable foundation for further developmental complexity. One of the central developments in this phase is an enhancement of metacognitive organization. Metacognitive organization involves the ability not only to observe one's thoughts and emotions, but to analyze the structural patterns that govern them. In cognitive science, this reflects higher-order monitoring functions associated with self-regulated learning and advanced introspective accuracy. Within the context of generational inheritance, such organization enables the individual to trace emotional impulses back to their origin, distinguishing between those shaped by inherited narratives and those formed through direct personal experience. By understanding these origins, the individual significantly reduces the influence of unconscious generational conditioning and increases intentional behavioral control. This emerging clarity supports the development of evaluative neutrality. Evaluative neutrality refers to the capacity to examine inherited narratives without emotional polarization. Instead of viewing ancestral experiences as inherently positive or negative, the individual evaluates them through a more analytical and functional lens. Research in transgenerational psychology emphasizes neutrality as a key factor in breaking cyclical patterns, as emotional bias often distorts perception and impedes accurate interpretation. When neutrality is achieved, the individual gains the psychological distance necessary to examine generational patterns with objectivity, identifying which aspects require preservation, modification, or release. A related advancement at this stage is the process of symbolic reframing. Symbolic reframing involves altering the meanings attached to inherited memories, images, and internal representations. For instance, a symbol once associated with instability may be reconstructed as evidence of adaptability, survival, or generational resilience. Meaning, making theories support this type of cognitive restructuring, showing that when individuals assign new interpretations to emotionally charged symbols, they alter both their emotional responses and the long-term psychological significance of those symbols. Through symbolic reframing, the individual transforms ancestral memory from a passive influence into an active resource for developmental growth. As symbolic reframing becomes integrated, the individual experiences increased relational stability. Relational stability arises when internal coherence reduces the projection of unresolved ancestral emotions onto interpersonal relationships. Rather than interpreting interactions through the lens of inherited fears or expectations, the individual engages from a position of emotional groundedness. Developmental studies on attachment and interpersonal functioning suggest that individuals with high internal stability often become regulatory anchors in their relational environments, promoting clearer communication, reduced conflict, and enhanced emotional safety for others. This relational impact demonstrates how internal transformation naturally extends into broader social systems. Continuing this trajectory, the individual develops refined adaptive discernment. Adaptive discernment is a multidimensional form of judgment that incorporates intuitive signals, pattern recognition, emotional accuracy, and critical evaluation. Because earlier, emotional residues have been resolved or integrated, the individual's intuition becomes more reliable, drawing from a well-organized internal database of both personal and generational experiences. Neuroscientific work on predictive processing supports this idea by showing that humans generate anticipatory models of the world based on accumulated patterns. For an individual with integrated ancestral material, these models are enriched and more precise, enabling clearer decision-making even in ambiguous or rapidly changing environments. This refined discernment naturally enhances the individual's tolerance for developmental uncertainty. Whereas earlier phases may have activated inherited anxiety or confusion in response to ambiguity, the current phase fosters a more adaptive relationship with uncertainty. Tolerance for uncertainty is widely recognized in resilience research as a predictor of psychological flexibility and emotional stability. When uncertainty is reframed not as a threat but as a necessary element of growth, the individual becomes capable of navigating transitions, challenges, and new opportunities without reactive patterns clouding judgment. This expanded tolerance further supports the creation of new generational trajectories. Another important development in this stage is what can be described as temporal integration. Temporal integration refers to the capacity to hold past, present, and future perspectives simultaneously without cognitive overload. The individual becomes able to contextualize present decisions within the larger framework of ancestral influence and future generational impact. This perspective aligns with narrative identity theories that emphasize the importance of temporal continuity for psychological well-being. Through temporal integration, the individual forms a multidimensional understanding of their identity, one that honors generational contributions while actively shaping future outcomes. Ultimately, this phase represents a sophisticated fusion of cognitive insight, emotional balance, and generational awareness. The individual is no longer merely interpreting inherited material, but actively reorganizing and transforming it into a coherent internal structure capable of guiding future development. Through metacognitive organization, evaluative neutrality, symbolic reframing, relational stability, adaptive discernment, and temporal integration, the individual demonstrates the capacity to alter their lineage's psychological trajectory. Their developmental progress illustrates that generational inheritance is not static but continuously shaped by conscious engagement. In this sense, the individual becomes a central figure in the evolution of their generational system, contributing to a more adaptive, coherent, and transformative inheritance for those who will follow. As the developmental progression moves into its later phase, a more intricate form of psychological integration begins to crystallize. At this point, the individual is not merely interpreting inherited material, but actively reorganizing the internal frameworks through which generational information is processed. This phase may be described as advanced ancestral coherence, a condition in which memory, emotional residue, symbolic patterns, and narrative meaning form a stable internal system rather than a series of fragmented impressions. This coherence supports a sophisticated form of self-regulation, allowing the individual to maintain internal balance even when confronted with significant external or emotional complexity. One of the most compelling features of this stage is the emergence of symbolic resonance. Symbolic resonance occurs when ancestral symbols or themes that once appeared vague or emotionally charged begin to acquire functional meaning. They are no longer experienced as unexplained memories or intuitive impressions, but as cognitive cues embedded with generational intelligence. In cognitive anthropology, such internal symbols are understood as carriers of cultural knowledge that persist even when explicit stories have been lost. Through resonance, the individual learns to interpret these symbols not as passive artifacts, but as active components of psychological guidance. This shift influences the individual's internal narrative architecture. Earlier stages of integration may involve confusion or ambivalence about one's story, but now the narrative becomes more stable and logically structured. The individual constructs a worldview in which past events, generational struggles, and inherited strengths form a purposeful continuum rather than a disjointed timeline. Research in narrative identity suggests that individuals who achieve this level of coherence exhibit higher resilience, clearer long-term goals, and stronger adaptive capacity. The internal story becomes a cognitive map, supporting both emotional stability and future-oriented decision-making. A significant cognitive development in this stage is the strengthening of relational perception. Relational perception refers to the ability to perceive interpersonal dynamics not as isolated interactions, but as expressions of larger systems. Instead of reacting to the behavior of others at face value, the individual begins to analyze how patterns of communication, emotional expression, and social roles may reflect inherited relational structures. This awareness aligns with contemporary systems psychology, which emphasizes the interplay between individual behavior and multi-generational relational patterns. With this deeper perception, the individual becomes increasingly capable of interrupting maladaptive cycles and fostering healthier modes of interaction. The refinement of relational perception also enhances emotional differentiation. Emotional differentiation is the capacity to distinguish between one's own emotions and the emotional material inherited or projected by others. Earlier stages may involve confusion between personal feelings and ancestral residue, but at this level, the individual achieves clarity about what originates internally versus externally. This insight strengthens emotional autonomy, allowing the individual to engage with others compassionately without being absorbed into their emotional states. It is a hallmark of psychological maturity and is essential for the stability required to influence generational change. Another critical development is the emergence of anticipatory insight. Anticipatory insight is the ability to foresee the implications of generational patterns before they manifest in the present. It operates like an internal predictive model, integrating experiential knowledge with inherited memory. Neuroscientific research on predictive processing suggests that the brain constantly generates models of future outcomes based on past and present information. In this advanced stage, the individual's predictive models incorporate ancestral patterns, resulting in a more nuanced and accurate perception of unfolding situations. This insight allows the individual to intervene early, preventing the repetition of harmful cycles and reinforcing positive ones. The combination of narrative stability, symbolic resonance, relational perception, and anticipatory insight culminates in a form of psychological authority. Unlike authority derived from external status or power, psychological authority is internal and self-sustaining. It emerges from the individual's confidence in their interpretive frameworks and their capacity to regulate their emotional state. This authority influences how the individual engages with social environments. Their presence conveys stability, fostering trust and clarity in interpersonal interactions. With this authority comes a renewed sense of generational stewardship. The individual begins to perceive themselves as an active participant in shaping future generational outcomes. Rather than viewing generational inheritance as a fixed legacy, they understand it as a dynamic system that can be redirected, refined, or elevated through intentional behavior. This form of stewardship aligns with theories of intergenerational transmission, which highlight the significant impact that one individual can have on altering the developmental trajectories of those who follow. Ultimately, this stage reflects a deep maturation of the individual's relationship with time, identity, and lineage. They become a point of synthesis where ancestral information is not merely preserved but transformed. Their psychological development becomes a mechanism through which the generational system evolves. This transformation demonstrates that generational inheritance is not static. It is responsive, adaptive, and profoundly shaped by conscious engagement. Through this awareness, the individual embodies the potential for generational renewal and long-term systemic change. As the developmental trajectory approaches its highest phase, the individual encounters a form of cognitive emotional integration that can be described as generational synthesis. Generational synthesis represents the culmination of multiple earlier processes: ancestral insight, symbolic restructuring, existential agency, and intuitive refinement. At this stage, the individual does not merely carry ancestral memory. They operationalize it as a functional component of their reasoning, behavioral modeling, and long-term decision-making. In psychological terms, this synthesis mirrors advanced forms of metacognition, wherein an individual becomes capable of observing the structure of their own thoughts, while simultaneously evaluating the systemic origins of those thoughts. This dual awareness produces a heightened capacity for intentional self-direction within complex environments. A major feature of generational synthesis is the emergence of what researchers describe as longitudinal identity coherence. This coherence extends beyond the typical domain of personal identity, incorporating a perceived continuity between past generations, current experience, and anticipated future outcomes. Individuals functioning at this level begin to understand themselves not as isolated agents, but as nodes within a temporal network of influences, responsibilities, and evolving potentials. This shift in identity perspective aligns with contemporary theories in narrative psychology, which propose that mental health and adaptive functioning are strengthened when an individual's life story is positioned within broader temporal and relational contexts. Through longitudinal coherence, the individual stabilizes their self-concept by aligning it with a multi-generational framework. Within this expanded identity context, the individual's problem-solving strategies become increasingly systemic rather than symptomatic. Instead of responding to isolated events, they evaluate the underlying patterns that produce these events. This analytical shift is consistent with systems theory, which emphasizes that the behavior of a system emerges from the interaction of its components rather than from any single variable. By adopting a systemic perspective, the individual becomes adept at identifying leverage points, small adjustments in behavior perspective, or relational dynamics that produce disproportionately large improvements across multiple domains of life. This ability marks a significant cognitive advance and reflects the maturation of integrative reasoning. An important outcome of this cognitive advancement is the individual's enhanced tolerance for developmental paradox. Most people experience internal conflict when confronted with contradictions or unresolved tensions, but individuals who reach generational synthesis learn to interpret paradox as a natural component of complex developmental processes. This interpretation aligns with dialectical thinking, a cognitive style associated with high levels of psychological flexibility. dialectical thinkers recognize that opposing truths can coexist and that resolution often emerges not through elimination of tension, but through its careful integration. This capacity enables the individual to navigate uncertainty without resorting to rigid thinking patterns or defensive emotional responses. As the individual stabilizes within this dialectical orientation, they develop an increased capacity for what researchers refer to as pro-social generativity. Pro-social generativity involves the desire and ability to contribute to the well-being of future generations through knowledge, emotional regulation, cultural transmission, and behavioral modeling. In this context, generativity extends beyond biological descendants, encompassing any relational systems influenced by the individual's presence or actions. This orientation is grounded in empirical findings, showing that generativity contributes significantly to life satisfaction, cognitive vitality, and emotional resilience in adulthood. It also represents a key psychological mechanism through which individuals influence the trajectory of their broader social and familial environments. In practical terms, pro-social generativity manifests through mentorship behaviors, increased empathy, constructive communication, and a willingness to assume responsibility for relational stability. Rather than viewing such behaviors as burdens, the individual regards them as natural extensions of their internal coherence. Their psychological maturity positions them as stabilizing figures within their communities, capable of diffusing conflict, offering perspective, and fostering emotional safety. These behaviors create micro-environments in which others can develop more adaptive cognitive and emotional patterns, demonstrating how generational synthesis extends outward to shape social systems. A final component of this advanced developmental phase is the crystallization of predictive insight. Predictive insight differs from intuition in that it integrates experiential knowledge, cognitive patterns, symbolic understanding, and emotional attunement into a cohesive anticipatory framework. Individuals at this level can recognize emerging patterns long before they become visible to others. This capacity is not supernatural but deeply cognitive, rooted in pattern recognition networks, strengthened through years of reflective practice, emotional regulation, and generational understanding. Predictive insight allows the individual to anticipate relational dynamics, environmental shifts, and internal psychological developments with remarkable accuracy. Predictive insight strengthens decision-making by allowing the individual to evaluate long-term implications rather than short-term outcomes. This aligns with research on foresight and temporal intelligence, which suggests that individuals who can accurately project future consequences demonstrate higher adaptability and lower stress levels. Through this anticipatory awareness, the individual becomes capable of guiding their own developmental trajectory with precision while also influencing the trajectories of those around them. In sum, the final stage of ancestral integration reflects a sophisticated form of psychological evolution. The individual becomes a dynamic intersection of past, present, and future, a cognitive bridge through which generational patterns are analyzed, transformed, and transmitted. Their identity, once shaped by fragmented inherited narratives, becomes an integrated system of meaning. Their decisions, once reactive, become deliberate expressions of generational wisdom. Their presence, once influenced by environmental instability, becomes a stabilizing force for others. Through this transformation, the individual exemplifies how human development can transcend personal boundaries and function as an instrument of multi-generational adaptation and renewal. Chosen One. As this message reaches its holy conclusion, let your spirit rest in the truth that has unfolded before you. The mystery that once lived in silence is now breathing through you. What your grandfather carried in secrecy has awakened in your lifetime, and the transfer that began in the unseen is already moving with purpose. This is your Kairos moment, anointed one, the exact divinely appointed hour where inheritance becomes activation. Walk forward with reverence, for the same God who guided him through shadows now guides you with clarity. The mantle he guarded has become the mantle you wear. Trust the signs, honor the peace, and recognize every gentle confirmation as heaven declaring you are the one. May your path be ordered, your discernment sharpened, your strength renewed. May favor surround you and wisdom increase within you. What began as a whisper has become your assignment. If this word has stirred, you acknowledge it in the comments and let your agreement rise. And if your spirit feels led, remain connected to this space of revelation. Go forth, chosen one. The transfer is active, the legacy is alive, destiny is now.